Fertility is a team sport. There is no way to disentangle the male factor from the ability of having a healthy baby. And most of the time, what happens is that we hear this women being afraid of not being able to get pregnant. But what about the men being afraid of not being able to get their partners pregnant? And what about that essentially being 50% of the reason as to why pregnancies don't occur to begin with?
Well, welcome to Biohacking with Brittany, the podcast where science meets wisdom. I'm Brittany Ford, holistic nutritionist, biohacker, and mom. And for years, I struggled with gut issues, hormonal imbalances, and the exhaustion of motherhood while running a business. Biohacking and functional medicine became my way back to clarity, vitality, and trust in my body. And that's why I'm here, not just to share information, but to share the practices and perspectives that truly shifted my health and my life. Each week, I bring you science-backed tools, honest conversations, and rituals I live myself so you can return to your own body's wisdom and create longevity on your own terms. Because your body already knows this is just the space to remember. Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. I am thrilled that you are listening. I am recording from beautiful Nicaragua, and I'm so excited to be here. I cannot wait to share more with you about my journey. Traveling here, being here, looking for the healthiest place to raise a family, and stay tuned as this content comes out. Before we dive into this episode, I just want to mention that I have 2 spots left in my Costa Rica retreat, which is happening in a couple of months. And this is going to be really huge. It's all about women's longevity and optimization. And if you feel the call of like, I really want to spend my energy on something that's going to propel my health and my life all year and onwards, this is what you need to do. 6 days, Costa Rica, at arguably the nicest retreat resort in all of the country. It's immaculate. Like, I can't even talk high enough about it. It's a very, very small group of women, intentionally intimate, so that we can dive into your health and what's going on in your life and really just embrace each other in womanhood, to be honest. There's women coming from different countries, moms, not moms, different ages. Everyone is welcome. So if you want to grab one of these last 2 spots, let me know. Send me a message on Instagram, email me, book a call on my website, biohackingbrittany.com. I'd love to have you. And a shout out, oh my goodness, to my masterclass next week on feminine longevity, the feminine longevity shift, and why becoming more you actually helps you live longer. This is something I have been dreaming of and I have been manifesting and thinking about. And I talk about it in a lot of my most recent podcast recordings about how living in alignment actually propels your health and elevates your health and why and how and all of that. Tune in. It's a 2-day event next Wednesday and Thursday, January 1st and 22nd. I guess it depends when you're listening to this, but that is when we're doing it. And it is it's going to be really fun. Recordings will be available. So if you can't make it live, you do get access to it if you sign up for free. So just sign up for free on my website. So easy. Name, email. That's it. And you get access to it. And I'm so excited to bring this episode to you today. This is with Gabriela Rosa, who is a Harvard awarded fertility specialist, founder of the Rosa Institute, and the creator of the Fertile Method and the Fertility Breakthrough Program. So she has an integrative, evidence-based approach to fertility for men and women. So we talk about how fertility is a team sport, and I love this. I have my own fertility course called Baby Steps, which is actually in my online community, and you get full access to it when you join my community. And we talk about that actually, like how I created this 90-day protocol about little habits you can do every day to promote and elevate your fertility for men and women. So we dive into this. You guys know fertility, motherhood, postpartum, pregnancy is all one of my favorite things to talk about. And this episode is very much aligned with that. So thank you for listening. I will catch you soon for another one. I'm putting out episodes every Tuesday and Thursday now. I moved it from Friday to Thursday because I'm taking Fridays off to be with my family and honestly to be with my kid. And so enjoy this and let me know if you have any questions about my retreat or my masterclass, and I would love to have you. Well, Gabriela, welcome to the show. I am so excited to be talking all things fertility with you. I feel like it's been a minute since I've done a fertility episode, and I'm just so grateful that you're joining me.
No, thank you for having me. It's always wonderful to have this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh, where do I start? So I developed a couple of years ago, developed a fertility preconception course that I've now put into my community for free. And it kind of came from this place of when I was going through my own fertility journey, I was looking online and I was looking for support in how to optimize my health before I started trying to conceive versus everything I saw online was very much like geared towards the couple that has been trying and been unsuccessful so far. And so I was like, wait, before we even start trying, let's like become as healthy as we can be, me and my husband. Um, what do you think in terms of like preconception health? It's kind of becoming more trendy now. Like, what do you think about that whole philosophy in general?
I think that's a great question. And it's wonderful to hear you be so proactive because not everybody is. And so, and certainly from the perspective of where I started my career was exactly in this place. I trained as a naturopathic doctor and I really knew from early on that this was a conversation that had my interest. For my own reasons, I was diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome at the age of 18, and I was told by a doctor I'd never have children. And so it was like a really interesting intersection to be in at the same time that I was, as I said, 18. So it wasn't like I was desperate to have a baby tomorrow. And I think because I was young and naive and didn't really know any better, I was kind of like, and I was studying and I was, focused on my career at the time. The thought in my mind was, well, if I can't have kids, I'll just focus on my career, and I didn't really feel like it had impacted me until many years later when I started to realize looking back that, hang on a second, like specialize in treating couples to have babies now. And it was a really interesting kind of turning point for me. But what was interesting was really understanding the absolute vital role and the importance of, you know, prospective parents being as healthy as possible prior to a conception attempt. Because, what we know about fertility is that it is 40% to do with male factor, 40% to do with female factor, and 20% to do with embryonic factor and the environment that embryo develops in. So it's not a one-sided equation. It's certainly not a situation where it's a woman's issue, even though in society it's mostly looked at as if fertility is a woman's concern. What is also interesting is that most people are not as interested, and certainly I imagine that people in your community are going to be very different to this, but for the most part, people are interested in solving problems as opposed to preventing them, you know? And to a huge extent, that is how the healthcare system is designed. That is how, medicine is designed. And so that idea of preconception preparation is so incredibly important so that you can prevent quality of life loss down the track, time to pregnancy issues, maternal and infant issues that can be prevented by addressing both prospective parents' health and, of course, the health of the child in the long term. Research studies show very clearly that male parameters and male factor increases the risk of preeclampsia in women in late pregnancy and puts the mother's health and life as well as the infant's health and life at risk. And these are all preventable things. So when it comes to actually looking at preconception healthcare, it is of the most paramount importance. The issue that we have, and the reason that we don't hear about it so much, when you go and see your doctor for your well woman appointment or well male appointment, imagine that, is that'd be amazing. Is really because the system is structured in such a way that, in terms of revenue and in terms of cost effectiveness, if the cost of treating a disease is the same as preventing it, it's not going to be utilized for prevention. It's going to be utilized for treatment. So that's the stark reality, of where we find ourselves in society these days. But I certainly feel that it's an incredibly important piece for most couples to consider.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad that you kind of like broke it down like that. kind of went through something similar where I thought I might have PCOS. Um, and I think I was 25 maybe, and similar, but like not ready to have kids. But what it did was it created this fear in me of like, oh, I might not be able to have a baby when I want a baby. And so it was part of like the sun is in my face. It was part of like really just propelling me onto this whole journey of like, when that day comes when I'm ready for a kid, to, I want to be successful. So it's, uh, it's hard because it's like, I'm grateful that it happened and it made me very healthy and my husband healthy and all of these things that came from it. But it's also hard when you're kind of running from a place of fear like that, of like fear I might not get pregnant before I've even tried.
Mm.
And then I'm sure, and you deal with this with your clients, is like you go on social media and it's like everyone is like struggling to get pregnant, miscarriages, this and that, or freezing their eggs, or IVF, or all of my friends, right? And so then this fear is like so loud in your head before you've even tried.
Yeah.
And so it's hard. And I was just at a retreat last week with a bunch of women who had just met for the first time. And two of them were on 8-year trajectory, like 8 years of trying to get pregnant. 8 years.
Mm, mm. That's another day. That's another day in my office. I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, it really is challenging.
Yeah. And so like, I guess my question for you is like, how do you support women in this like topic that is so sensitive and there's so much fear around it, but so many women want to be moms, but it's just so fragile. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that where we need to start really is in the fact that fertility is a team sport. There is no way to disentangle the male factor from the ability of having a healthy baby. And most of the time, what happens is that we hear this, women being afraid of not being able to get pregnant. But what about the men being afraid of not being able to get their partners pregnant? And what about that essentially being 50% of the reason as to why pregnancies don't occur to begin with? And I think that for the most part, men are left out of this conversation, unfortunately, to the detriment of the couple's outcome, at the end of the day. So when we're talking about things not being easy, and of course, we know infertility is defined as 1 year of trying to get pregnant without success. But at the end of the day, there are different age ranges that will also make the need for speeding up that process be quite relevant. And so from the perspective of what we need to look at is not leaving fertility as an afterthought. And for most couples who struggle or who may be older, it wasn't done by design. It wasn't a situation where they basically decided, oh, let's just leave fertility for the last possible moments that we have to try and have a baby. Usually people are going to their doctor's appointments. They're discussing the fact that they want to be pregnant and they're not yet, or they're afraid to get tested and get bad news, or whatever it is, in advance of starting to try. But I think that sometimes we need to look at whatever might come at us when we are at that very early stage as information. It's information that you can act upon and do something about. Because if we delay seeking care or understanding because we are afraid of what we might find, and I see so many couples that delay because the partner is scared of what they might see in a semen analysis, as opposed to just going, you know what, whatever happens, I'm going to see it, I'm going to know, I'm going to either do something about it or I'm going to have to decide on a different path to have a baby. But at least there is clarity on that journey, and I think for me personally, one of the really wonderful things of being told in the way that I was, you're at 18, I might never have children, was that it enabled to have very frank conversations with my partner when we met to say, hey, listen, this is something that you need to know and it might be a deal breaker for you. So you need to let me know. Right. And then as it turned out, we met and neither of us was ready to have a baby and to start trying to have a family. And it took like another 8 years before I was even, considering that possibility. But one of the conversations that we had early on, because of my situation and because of my field of expertise, was like, hey, why don't you do a semen analysis and let's have a look and see where we're at, right? And in doing that, and he was very brave. I mean, most men aren't that brave, but he was a very practical, pragmatic man, like, let's see what we need to see, and that's it. And that's a really good thing because we were able to find that there were some issues that needed to be addressed, and there was zero morphology. And, so by looking at it and understanding it, it made me go, okay, it's not for now. We need to optimize different aspects of health over time and be aware of protecting fertility for both of us. But when we do decide that we want to start preparing, this is something that we need to be aware of. Because, with zero morphology, you need at least 4% for natural conception to occur. And for even IVF to succeed, if you have less than that, what ends up happening is that, sure, you may not have fertilization at all. You may have implantation failure, and most likely are going to have miscarriage, increased risk. So, with situations like that, when you already know in advance, then you can at least prepare, you can do something about it. If you don't know, imagine you go and you pay for a $20,000 IVF cycle because you're told that's what you need. It fails, and you're like, oh, now let's look at what we could improve and optimize. Like, wouldn't it be better to spend that couple of $1,000s on just figuring out what's not quite right at the outset and saving yourself even perhaps the need for a $20,000 cycle, or at least a $20,000 failed cycle? And certainly I see this happen all the time with my patients. You've mentioned 8 years of infertility. I mean, the longest standing case of infertility that I've treated successfully was 19 years. So I can only imagine, what somebody imagine trying pregnancy test after pregnancy test, month, year, decade, and so there's a lot to that. And many of the couples who come to my clinic now, the average number of years of infertility is 4. And so, plus or minus 3. And so I'm seeing this literally all day, every day, where people really, for the most part, the reason that most people don't get the kind of care they need is because if you think about what happens in the general population, the majority of people conceive without trying. That's why we hear so many people, such and such had a one-night stand and oops, got pregnant. This one got off the pill and is having a baby. And it's like, oh, okay, that clearly sounds like it's happening everywhere. And of course, wherever we're focused in our attention at the time is where we're going to pay attention. But if you look at population data, really what we see is that within 2 years of trying, 96.4% of the population of people who are trying to get pregnant will be pregnant. So the people who aren't is that remaining, 4%, 3-something percent. And so that essentially tells us that, okay, what do we do from there? Most of those couples, after 12 months, they're literally just going to be shown the door to the IVF clinic, and most of them will do it with an over 79% failure rate. So for every cycle started, the vast majority fails. Now, imagine if you were told that at the outset. Most people, I have this conversation with patients all the time because I had a lady who said to me the other day, oh my God, I can't believe that, here I am 2 cycles down the track and I wasn't told this information. This is published data. I'm not making this up. Like, this is literally, you go to PubMed, you will find it, right? And so basically, she said, I said, if your doctor had said to you, because she was complaining about the fact that, she was really only told after the first cycle had failed, oh, we're just learning your cycle on the first cycle. So we're just, we have to do another cycle now to figure out what's going on. And I'm like thinking, tell me, if you had been told at the first cycle that, look, the first cycle is just to learn about your cycle, would you do it? She goes, absolutely not, And so those are the types of things that we need to contend with, not let alone the biological components of what's going on and what's not working. But the fact that sometimes people are not even aware that it's not a silver bullet to go and have IVF, that it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to walk away with a baby. you certainly will walk away with an incredible amount of expense, that's for sure. And the cost, physical, emotional, financial, of going through these procedures without necessarily, being able to be guaranteed the outcome that you're looking for at the end of the day.
This episode is brought to you by Optimize Her, my women's biohacking retreat in Costa Rica, happening March 2nd to 7th, 2026. I am so excited, guys. This isn't just another yoga retreat. It's a 5-night, 6-day, science-backed health optimization woven into feminine restoration, designed specifically for women's bodies. We'll dive into functional medicine and longevity tools, experience healing sessions like sound baths and cacao ceremonies, and recalibrate with daily movement, spa rituals, and farm-to-table meals that support hormones, gut health, and vitality. It's not about fixing. It's about clearing the noise so you can actually tune into your body again. If you're ready for deep restoration and transformation, you can explore all the details in the show notes, and I would absolutely love to see you in Costa Rica. Yeah. Yeah, it's honestly heartbreaking. Like, it's really sad. It's really sad. And like I said, I've had friends go through very different fertility experiences. My one friend was dealing with secondary infertility, right? So she got pregnant right away on the first try with her first kid. And then she was like, oh, okay, like we're ready for a second. It's 4 years later, whatever it's been. And then they struggled, and she had 3 miscarriages in a row. And then she's like, okay, it's time to go to IVF. And they did all the appointments and they were setting everything up. And then the time came for her to start injecting herself. And right before that month, she got pregnant. And she's like, I don't know if it's because I was less stressed because I knew now we might get pregnant in this way, or like, I don't know. But and there's so many different stories like that, and you hear different things, and it was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking talking to her and just being like, how can I help you? What can I do? And even like, I'm sure you deal with this too, is like, what do you say to the woman who's coming to you with secondary infertility, who's like, wait, I got pregnant and had a first child. Why can't it happen again?
Yeah. You see, it's interesting. And there's a couple of points here that you mentioned that I think are worth talking about, which is this idea of, people trying for a long time, and then they go and start thinking about doing IVF and they conceive, all of a sudden. It's usually not exactly like that. That's how they remember it, But but usually most people who are trying for a long time, what do? They immediately get on Google, they get on all the forums, they start looking at what can I do to improve my health, my fertility, my partner's sperm, the this or that. They start making changes, they start making adjustments, which is all well and good. Sometimes they start doing things that are completely crazy that, is not going to actually get them to it. Like, the number of myths that I have to bust on a day-to-day basis are just like insane, right? But the point here is that most of the time when it hasn't happened easily and people have struggled or are struggling, they're concurrently looking for other things that they can do to improve their chances. The greatest issue that most people have in that situation is when it has been long-standing, they have done multiple things that haven't worked, they have done multiple failed cycles, and they ask their doctors and say, hey, is there something that I can do here to improve my fertility or my chances? And they're told, no, there's nothing you can do. We just have to keep doing it. It's a numbers game. But the people who, are going to go into IVF with the idea of like, okay, I'm going to give this a really good shot, for the most part, especially if they're health conscious, they are already putting in place foundational lifestyle medicine concepts to optimize their chances. And those changes, they usually take a little bit of time to see results, to bear fruit, so to speak. The day you plant the tree isn't the day that you get the fruit, and the same thing applies to fertility. The egg has a maturation cycle of 12 months. It's about 375 days. If you think about what that means, we are born with all the eggs we'll ever have. And so there are 2 maturation cycles from primordial follicle to primary follicle, which is about 6 months long. And then you have a primary follicle to ovulatory follicle, which is another kind of 5 to 6 months long. And so the last 120 days of that maturation process, the egg is most sensitive and influenced by exposures, external exposures, lifestyle exposures. But really, it's actually being developed throughout and matured throughout whatever exposures that a woman is facing and being, surrounded by throughout that entire period. So the longer the time that she has been trying, if she has been also additionally looking at optimizing and doing things that can be improving her health and her fertility, it's possible that those changes are going to have a biological effect that is then seen, a period of time later. Not to say that people should delay seeking care, because by no means lifestyle is a replacement for treatment. It's never going to be. When I see people kind of going and telling me, I run a free event called the Fertility Challenge, which I've been running for decades. And literally what it does is it teaches people what are the things that you can do, the practical things, the diet, the exercise, the lifestyle, the basic primary essential things that you should be doing if you are in the preconception stage and or if you are planning to do any treatment. And, one of the things that I often hear from people is like, they'll say, oh, but I already knew that. First thing I'll say is knowing and not doing is the same as not knowing. Okay. So knowing and recognizing and agreeing does not mean implementation that drives results and change, right? So that's the first thing. And I think that most people need to also understand that not all change is an improvement. And highlight that, underline that, listen to that again. Not all change is an improvement. So you've done 10 cycles with one clinic. The next cycle with the next clinic isn't going to be the thing that's going to transform 10 failed cycles, right? For the most part, people misunderstand the absolute vital importance of figuring out what is causing these failures. And also understanding that no matter what, lifestyle is a foundation upon which you can overlay effective treatment. It's not treatment on its own, but these things will make a difference, particularly for male fertility and male factor parameters. It's incredible what improvements you can make by cleaning up the lifestyle, removing the alcohol, quitting smoking, infections, looking at underlying infections that often are silent, that overgrowth in the semen culture, just the most basic, one of the other things, sleep. Sleep is one of those things that in terms of, there was a study, it was a really interesting study looking at if a man had less than 6 hours sleep for 1 week, his testosterone levels were essentially the equivalent of being 10 years older than their age, just by not getting enough sleep. So if you have testosterone that is 10 years older than your age, that eventually will impact your sperm parameters, no matter who you are, right? And so looking at all of these things that we can implement and understanding what they are and the difference between the things that actually will move the needle and the things that are just things to do, because there's 1,000 things you can do. And, for each person, there might be 3 or 5 that actually move the needle. And they're personalized things. They're not, every single person. So it's almost to say, when we look at the effect of certain exposures on health, we've all heard of people that have never smoked a day in their life and died of lung cancer, right? And then you've heard of people who are chain smokers who never developed lung cancer at all. And you've got to question, hang on a second, same exposure, it's the cigarette smoke, but why is it that one person died, the other one didn't? Well, epigenetic impact. Right? So the way in which your genes respond to that exposure will be differential. And so for fertility, the same applies. One person may have a certain exposure. This is why we see drug addicts, heroin addicts getting pregnant, having babies left, right, and center. It's not that women who are struggling to conceive should start shooting up heroin. That's not a good idea, right? It's actually that differential exposures will have a different effect and impact on a different person. And so starting to look at the things that, okay, if the things that you are doing that you already know have some kind of negative effect in terms of health in general, it's a really good idea if you are not where you want to be, either in terms of your health or your fertility, that you look at those exposures, that you look at those issues, because just because other people out there in the world are having, getting pregnant by drinking, smoking, doing whatever, you are not. And therefore, it's about looking at, okay, how do I differentially need to address my situation and not leave it to chance? Because for the vast majority of people, they're not going to be having their doctor sit with them and go, okay, let's have a look and audit your entire lifestyle. It's going to be something that you're going to have to drive to a certain extent.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually love that. And I talk about that in my course. And when I was talking to my husband about getting on board, about doing this like minimum 90-day protocol that I created, he was actually so great. Like his perspective was, you're going to be pregnant for 9 months. Then you're going to you have postpartum. You're going to try breastfeed, all of these things. The least I can do is try to be healthy for 3 months and that type of thing. And so we tested his sperm before and after, and we actually tripled his sperm count. And it was some of the things that you said. So he stopped drinking completely. No drugs at all, like no cannabis, working out every single day, hydration, sleep, stress management, nutrition, no processed food. Like we went so clean, and it was intense. Like it was a full on detox. Like it was a full on thing. Yeah, and I did it as well. But he was so surprised to see how much healthier his sperm was just from doing that for like 90, 100 days.
Yeah. It's incredible. Like for most healthy men, and, there are some situations where even with very not so healthy men, I'll give an example in a moment, but, for most healthy men, the amount of improvement you can have from the most basic of interventions is incredible. And then there are really difficult, complex cases. Like I had a lady once who came to me, she was a doctor in the UK and had 2 failed ICSI cycles. And essentially, her husband was on the list for a kidney transplant and his sperm was 0.2 million. So, there's no way that they would have conceived naturally. You need at least 20 million sperm for a natural conception. And so, she was like, listen, I've heard of you. I want to be treated by you. Can you help me? And I assess the case. I assess every case in the clinic. I don't take on couples that I don't think I can help. And I assessed the case and I could see that, yeah, there's work to be done. It's work we can do. We've done it before in terms of the overall optimization for another cycle if that was needed. And I said to her, look, let's see how much we can improve. I don't know, given the fact that, your husband does have kidney failure. I don't know how much we can improve his sperm parameters given that situation, but let's do all of the work and figure it out. So we did exactly that. And, in a few months, his sperm went from 0.2 million to 52 million. And this was before his kidney transplant. So they actually were able to conceive naturally. It's funny because they conceived naturally the first time. He had his transplant. They, basically were like, he recovered so much better and so much faster. And then they decided that they wanted to complete their family and have another baby and decided, okay, we're older, running out of time. Let's go and do another ICSI cycle. Failed again. And then we got serious, about, okay, let's do this again the way that we did previously. And again, she conceived naturally for the second time a couple of years later with a very similar approach of personalization and precision medicine and really looking at what is it that we're dealing with for you specifically that's creating. And look, she had also other health conditions. She had thalassemia, and there was a lot of issues, that we had to address for both of them. But the reality is that, for the most part, when we are getting very clear about what the issues are and addressing them specifically, it's incredible the transformation that can occur. And even in cases where I see, very poor sperm parameters, it doesn't always improve. A sperm cycle is about 3.5 months. So that's how long it takes to generate sperm from scratch, which women, like I said before, we're born with all the eggs we'll ever have. But men are creating and generating sperm literally throughout their life course. And of course, it declines with the ability to generate healthy sperm declines with age because men also have andropause. Women have menopause, men have andropause, and that's where testosterone levels start to decrease and decline. And then after a while, it becomes a situation that, sperm production may cease altogether with age and testicular function issues. But ultimately, for the most part, most men will continue producing sperm until the end of their life, right? And so in some instances, one sperm cycle is enough to see incredible results, like you saw with your husband, that improvement and that change. Sometimes it might take 2 or 3 sperm cycles to see real transformation because, there are certain types of health issues and certain exposure effects that are more long lasting than others. And so we do have to take all of those factors into account. But it's, there's always a way to make improvements. And I think that that's really, a very important thing to take home is that, there's usually something that you can do. Now, when there are genetic factors in terms of sperm, then obviously the sperm count, like I'm thinking Klinefelters, for example, where basically the production of sperm is 0 and, sometimes 0 point something in a semen analysis. And sometimes we see absolutely no sperm on a semen analysis. But I have seen over the years, even with people with Klinefelters who needed to go and do ICSI, that we have been able to improve minimally sperm counts and sperm quality to the point where somebody could go and do an ICSI cycle, whereas there was no sperm in a teasy before, and then there was sperm in a teasy after. And so, these things are certainly possible. But it's one of those things you have to address the person as an individual because using a cookie cutter approach is usually not going to cut it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And we're seeing that across like healthcare in general now is like this idea of like personalized healthcare, which I love. And I think is so important and kind of like long overdue, actually. But I'm so curious in your personal opinion and I guess professional opinion as well, like when we're looking at the rates of infertility or couples struggling to get pregnant, I think it's 1 in 6 globally is what I last remember. Why do you think it's increasing from everything that you know? Like, what is it? Because it doesn't seem like we were dealing with this 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
You might be surprised by my answer. And, the thing about it is that I don't actually think that infertility rates are necessarily increasing. I'm seeing fertility rates decrease, and that is usually from a combination of factors, which they are different, okay? So fertility rates is fertility rates across the population, essentially people choosing to have babies. Whereas infertility rates is where people are having difficulty conceiving and they're not conceiving or having babies because they can't, right? So those are 2 different things. Now, when we look at fertility rates, they are indeed declining, throughout I guess most Western countries, but in many countries, not even just Western countries. And, if you think about it, it kind of makes sense because, and this is when most people get really confused with the message of like, but we are overpopulated, but we don't have enough babies. Like, how is this actually translating, right? So we're overpopulated because of infertility rates not decreasing, right? Because people are still having the ability to have babies, and the people who basically use no contraception, they have babies, right? And usually it's that people are less educated, they don't have access to healthcare or contraception, and that's essentially what ends up happening. Fertility rates, on the other hand, this is what we're hearing, like, oh, countries are running out of people, and the aging population is out. It's higher and greater than the younger population. That's because people are choosing not to have babies for various reasons that are usually personal and usually societal. So if you think about the cost of raising a child to age 21, we are talking in Western societies about over $1 million to raise one child, to the age of 21. Most people would rather save that money in this day and age, And so that is a big factor that I think a lot of times people are not really considering. This is why when governments get a little bit desperate, they go, you know what? Let's give a baby bonus. Let's give you $3,000 to have a baby. It's really just to kind of, like somehow pretend that that's going to be anywhere towards actually helping, people actually want to have babies. Why do you think that governments, decide to subsidize fertility treatment? It's not out of the kindness of their own heart. It's literally because they're like, you know what? We don't have enough people. We are going to be, because of war, death, old age, whatever else, not have enough population. And therefore, we need to figure out ways to incentivize people to have babies. And therefore, they figure out, okay, people are wanting to have babies, but they don't have access to fertility treatment. Well, let's make that an easier process or less expensive process so that it entices people to actually do whatever it is that's required to go and ideally try and have a baby. So there's a lot of really financial decisions that go into, having babies, not only from a personal individual perspective, but also from a government's perspective and from a healthcare system's perspective, right? So these are all things that get taken into account. Now, yes, 1 in 6 couples is infertile. And if you think about it, that's huge. Like at least a few people that are either struggling to get pregnant or experiencing recurrent miscarriage, right? Or early miscarriage or even implantation failure and chemical pregnancies that usually aren't counted as miscarriage, but they actually are really, the root cause is usually something arising from the fact that, things aren't quite going well with keeping a healthy pregnancy to term. Now, when we look at it from that perspective, then we have to see that, okay, are there factors here that are increasing the risk of us being able to actually take home a healthy baby? And the answer is yes. Okay. So when we look at what has happened in terms of like sperm parameters, there was a great study that followed people for 50 years in one of the Nordic countries. I think it was Sweden or something like that. And they looked at the count of sperm count in men over a 50-year period. And what they noted is that on the average, it had decreased by 50%, the sperm count. So we look at that and we go, okay, what are some of the reasons for that? And certainly some of the reasons there are going to be very much actionable and things that people can do things about, which is going to be the lifestyle factor pieces that we've talked about, but also our environmental exposures, right? What we don't understand enough, I think, is the fact that there are microplastics in the environment. There are endocrine disruptors that come in multiple forms. There's lots of different things that are affecting and disrupting endocrine function, which is essentially what balances hormones for reproduction, general health and reproduction, right? And so those are the things that we do need to take into account when we are looking at this whole spectrum of when people want to have babies, what are some of the things that will block that from occurring?
Yeah. Yeah. There's honestly so much there to unpack. And I imagine, I just think about the average woman who might be listening to this podcast who's struggling or on a fertility journey. Maybe we just word it like that. Like she's on her journey, right? She hasn't arrived, but she's on her journey. Hearing this, how do you as a practitioner, as an expert, distill it down so that she doesn't feel overwhelmed?
Yeah, I think that's a really beautiful question. And the way that I would convey that, to both partners is act pregnant now to get pregnant later. Ultimately, that's the answer is you're already carrying 50% of the little baby you want to create right now. And whether you are pregnant or not, you are essentially caring and nurturing for the cells that are going to eventually form the healthy baby that you want to meet. And therefore, and this applies to both partners because men are carrying 50% of their little baby in their testicles right now, right? And so it's about looking at it and going, okay, what are the things that if I was pregnant right now, absolutely I would start doing or stop doing to give my baby the healthiest and best possible start in life. Because that is what you want to start influencing. That's what you want to start doing or stop doing if you want to soon meet your healthy baby.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's really practical and helpful to actually like think from that perspective of like, okay, if we were pregnant, what would we do right now?
Yeah.
Um,
And I think most people know exactly. That's the thing. I think most people know the answer. Like, if I was to say that to you or anybody, like literally, I talk about this with men all the time, and they come up with lists that are as long as my arm of the things that they would stop doing and start doing. So I go, great, you know what to do, go do it, right? But also, I think that when you're framing it that way in your mind, it actually gives you a greater impetus to action and implement that advice because you now have a reason, a very specific reason. It's to hold the healthy baby of your dreams. And so most parents and prospective parents would do anything for their children, right? And so with that in mind, you go, okay, this just means that I'm doing everything that I can just a year or two before I actually meet them, And I think one of my patients put it the most beautifully in my entire 25-year career. And this is what she said when she had many years of infertility. There were many challenges that she was facing. And, when I said to her, I said, what kept you going? What kept you going through? She had multiple failed IVF cycles. Like it was a very long, complex history. And she said the words that literally I have never seen it. Like it even gives me goosebumps, even as I think of it right now and convey it to you. Like I never thought about it this way. And she said, when I was on my journey and I was, doing and looking for things that could improve my chances and help me to have my baby, it was like I knew my child was there. I knew it was like she was lost in a crowd in a fair and I was screaming out for her and I was calling her name and I just could not leave without her. I was like, oh, like, that to me was like, that reframed so much for me in my context of how I support my patients through really difficult and complex journeys, And so I think that if we position it from that perspective of like, okay, there is a purpose for what you're doing beyond yourself, it makes it easier to make difficult choices in the day to day.
yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I would love to actually ask you about that piece of the maybe the unseen, right? Like the intuition, especially for women that we might have. Like before I had my son, I would meditate and like imagine what he would be like. Like I didn't know he was going to be a boy, but like whatever, like just like really like I even bought a baby blanket and I just really went into like the energetics of it as well because kind of like what you said, I was like, if I was pregnant or had him right now, like how would this be different and what would I do? And then I actually started dreaming a lot actually as well about him. And then he like showed up as a boy and all these things. So in terms of that like intuition, energetic feeling, is that something that comes up a lot with your patients?
Look, I think that it's a part of being human, right? Like, I think that we often disaggregate things a lot and compartmentalize issues, and there are good times and places to do that, and then there is a time and a place to really look at how else can I pull this together, right? Even for people who don't have that kind of sense or don't have that kind of belief, I think that even just putting themselves in that mindset of, okay, I am wanting to invite a baby into my life. What does that look like? What does that feel like? How do I have that inner conversation and that inner preparation so that I continue to be motivated on the course toward creation of that outcome? And I think that different people believe different things. Like I have patients who are deeply religious and, really for them, it's their faith and how they view that. And then for others, they're just agnostic and they just have this kind of, in a sense, that nature is what, is the thing that they should be speaking to or in connection with. And so personally, obviously I'm a very spiritual person. I'm not a very religious person, like, in fact, you could probably say that I'm all religions. Uh, but I'm very spiritual in the way that I look at my life. And so, but it's not something that I push onto my patients if they feel like it's not something that benefits them. But for me personally, I find that, we all go through difficult things in life. We all go through challenges and trials and, things that we question. Can I overcome this? And we all have to pull from various sources of motivation to keep going. And I think that it's important to have whatever that is for you as a part of your toolbox, your toolkit, so to speak, right? Because there will be days that you just want to be on the ground in the fetal position, crying your eyes out because things aren't going the way that you want them to. So how do you pick yourself up from that is really important, and having tools and additional resources to be able to do so, I think, is very valuable.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm very similar. I agree with you. My both my parents are very Christian, and I sometimes I talk to my brothers, and like we don't identify as Christian. I'm like spiritual, but I say to them, I'm like, it's fine that they're Christian because it's actually healthier for them because they have something to lean on. They have the hope, they have the faith, they have the community when they're going through their own health struggles. So it's fine if you don't believe of like what they're actually talking about. But the fact that they can lean on something when they're going through a hard time, obviously not
Yeah.
fertility, but still is like so pivotal for our health in general that
Yeah.
people
But
don't realize, right?
look, there's absolutely a lot of research and evidence, looking at prayer and spiritual, kind of a pillar of spirituality in the improvement of health. There's a really interesting study that I read many years back where one group of participants was randomly assigned to being prayed for after uh, cardiovascular surgery. It was open heart surgery. And the other group was not prayed for. The people who were prayed for, and they didn't know, they were literally randomly assigned and they were just being prayed for. And the other group was not being prayed for. And the group that was being prayed for, they had less infections, they had faster healing, and they recovered better than the group that was not being prayed for. So, hey, listen, whatever you want to believe is fine by me, but hey, you have to leave room for uncertainty.
Wow. That's incredible.
I know. So, what is there, like, I can't say, like, I can't say that people praying for their baby isn't going to help them have their baby faster. Even if we look at it from an indirect perspective, if they believe that and they're praying for that, and because of that, they are going to the gym, they're eating healthy, they have better stability mentally and better mental health, of course those things are going to improve their chances of taking home a healthy baby. So I don't care if they think it's because of the prayer. It might be all of this other stuff they're doing as well. And it could be a combination of both. Who knows? I'm not God, right? Or whoever. And so it's one of those things that you've got to leave room for equipoise, as we would say in research, like that uncertainty. You don't know.
I love that. Yeah. And it could lower their stress, help them sleep better.
Well, that is certain. That is shown in clinical research that prayer and meditation, prayer, it reduces stress, it improves mental health. There's so many benefits. So, from that perspective, can we say, I have not read a study that literally specifically looks at those outcomes, and there probably are. I just haven't seen them. In fact, my doctoral thesis is actually looking at the emotional component of infertility. So, of course, there is enough, understanding and information out there to make me go, well, this is something that we should be studying. So it really is from that place. It obviously makes total sense, and it's one of those really interesting life journeys that when it doesn't work out, not every journey is going to end up in a baby. And I think that that's also what we do need to be real about, is the fact that not every fertility journey ends positively for the person and the couple. Some it leads to divorce, some it leads to having to change life courses, and so I think that, again, in those kinds of instances where we have other support mechanisms, it's important to be able to have other things to rely upon.
Yeah. 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 Oh, I just think that's so beautiful. And yeah, I mean, I also appreciate the honesty of like, it's not going to work for everybody. I think that's also a really important piece. And I'm curious to see your research and your paper and whatever you're publishing on the emotional component of this when this comes out, because that is something I do not see talked about enough in terms of like how that actually impacts fertility, infertility for both men and for women.
Yeah, so we're testing an intervention that essentially is designed to reduce infertility-related trauma, grief, and distress in women, in females who are struggling to conceive. If people want more information about that, we're currently recruiting. So I don't know when this is going to be aired, but it's possible that we're still recruiting at the point that this comes out. They can just type on a browser, Inspire, as in the verb inspire, study.online, and they will get to the eligibility criteria and can enroll to participate in the study if they want to from that website. So it's inspirestudy.online.
Amazing. Yeah, I will add that to the show notes. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Actually, we're going to hop over to my private community. You're going to answer some questions from some of the members. But before we do that, if people want to follow you on Instagram, work with you, where can they go?
So they can go on Instagram, they can go to Gabriela Rosa Fertility. So that's Gabriela. So it's just one L, Rosa, Gabriela Rosa Fertility. And my website is fertilitybreakthrough.com. And they can also just Google me. I'm most places.
Perfect. I will put that in the show notes and on the website so everyone can find you easily. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been great.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Biohacking with Brittany. I hope today's conversation gave you something to take into your own life, a practice, a perspective, or simply a reminder to trust your body. If you love this episode, please leave a review, share it with someone else who could benefit, and join me over on Instagram at biohackingbritney for more. And if you're ready to go deeper, you can explore my retreats, community, favorite tools, all linked for you in the show notes. Until next time, remember, your body already knows.